Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the organizing of this wonderful conference. And also thank you, Matúš, because we are running late, a few minutes, so I'll have to make it shorter.
Yes, but I don't know if it was due to me.
But anyways, looking at the title, you might be confused. Why is no circular economy there, no waste management? Well, there are several reasons for that. The first one is, if you have been listening very carefully to Dr. Rice's morning presentation, you might have noticed something about sustainable transport. And it is complementary part to circular economy. I will talk about it a little bit more into detail in a few minutes. The second reason, and this is a very plain reason, basically I kind of did not connect the dots. So I did not understand that this is going to be about circular economy. But anyways, I'm going to try to somehow navigate it through the circular economy and waste management, because if we are talking about sustainable transport, we need to address the waste management issues and eco-design and so on. So these are the main reasons why we focus, why I'm focusing on sustainable transport, especially in Czech Republic. And my third reason, well, basically we are all member states, so the fundamentals of EU waste management and even the circular economy are the same everywhere. But what is the difference and what differs is how we actually manage to do that, and this is up to each and individual member state to do it on their own. And plus, if you are interested in that, there's the you can check it out in the book. So I don't think you will miss anything. Firstly, my structure. Well, it is very easy and I think very comprehensive. I have some preliminary thoughts about sustainable transport, because we need to define what is sustainable transport. We will see about that. Then what is state of play in the EU? You might wonder if it's there or if it's not. Then I will focus on the Czech side, whether we actually have something like sustainable transport or what is Czech perspective. It will be similar to Slovakia, to Hungary, to Romania, because again, the basic and fundamental EU documents are there. So again, and the whole sector is unified basically. So what I'm going to tell you is going to be the same for all of us. Some thoughts. The first thing we need to address is the definition of sustainable transport. Do we have that? I don't think you can actually read it from out there, so I will read it. This is the Czech definition of Czech Ministry of the Environment. The first one is sustainable transport may be defined as transport that will enable conditions for carrying people and cargo in a manner that is functional, safe, economical, while at the same time avoids depletion of non-renewable energy sources. So very technical definition as such. But it is definition, it is something we have. Then when I was trying to Google it, the second definition comes from the United States Department of Energy. Sustainable transportation refers to low and zero emission, energy efficient and affordable modes of transport. So there are some similarities. Zero emission, low emission, non-renewable energy sources, renewable energy sources, this is basically very similar. However, if you look closely at the US definition, affordability. So suddenly there's this little bit shift to social side of things, because it's not only about the environmental and protection of environment, but also about social protection and social issues. Then, of course, the holy grail of all researchers, Wikipedia. Sustainable transport refers to ways of transportation that are sustainable, well, okay, in terms of their social and environmental impacts. So again, social and environmental impacts. So we are seeing some commonalities there. The UN doesn't really have anything like definition of sustainable transportation. However, they are defining it through their goals and targets. So sustainable transportation can enhance economic growth, improve accessibility, which is another part, accessibility. So if we are talking about sustainable transport, it's not only about the environment, about the depletion of sources, but it's about accessibility. So public transportation especially should be accessible to all people. And then we have sustainable transport achieves better integration of the economy while respecting the environment, improving social equity, health, resilience of cities. So this is our very important things that needs to be discussed or that needs to be taken into account when we are talking about sustainable transport. And if you look at the EU level, again, there's no definition. And it is very similar to the UN. This is from Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. Again, it's about sustainable alternatives. It's about some incentives, dependence on fossil fuels. So basically everything what I have said earlier is there. However, there's also something called internalization of external cost, which is a very important thing. And suddenly we are moving towards more economic approach. Because if I go back, internalization of negative externalities. We need to be more aware of that because 44% of negative externalities are environmental externalities. And if we shift towards more sustainable transport, all of those net externalities that somebody has to, in the end, pay, will be reduced. So therefore, we should focus more on polluters-pays principle. And it is still not concisely defined and implemented in our policies, in EU's policies. So this is this huge area, and this is a very huge gap we should somehow fill. And of course, this fragmented approach, and I will talk about it a little bit later. So if I have to sum it up, my preliminary thoughts, we need to think about affordability of transport. We need to think about the economy, so the side of transportation. Environment, of course, social equity, accessibility, and if you are a stakeholder, especially state, municipality, you need to have balanced approach. So these are issues that we need to be aware of when we are talking about sustainable transport. Then I was thinking, well, what are the possible approaches? But I think I can really skip that. Because those are basically the usual approaches we have if we want to solve something. So I can skip that. And now we are getting to the transport sector itself. And the issue here is that the transport sector is very huge, large, and it contains, well, 4 or 5 means of transport that are relevant for us. However, from those 4 means of transport, only one is the most relevant. Matusz, can you tell me which one?
Ship.
No. Laura?
Aviation.
Almost.
Almost.
Gabriela?
Rail.
No, it's road. But I will get to that. So why it's not rail? Well, because if you think about railway network, it's not mostly about the transport as such, but it's about your network. If you have electrified network, then you are not thinking about the cargoes and the trains. You are thinking about the energy.
Yeah.
Because if you have the electrified railway network, then your energy mix is predominantly made in alternative fuel sources, then your railway network is going to be much more greener. So this is something that is pretty easy to address. Shipping and aviation. From the international perspective, those 2 transport sectors are on a rise. The predictions are that in a few years they will cover, well, nowadays it's about 5 or 6% of all greenhouse gases in European Union. It's going to be a higher number in a few years. But currently what we need to deal with is road transport, because road transport makes about 70% of all greenhouse gases in transport sector, which is a huge number. It's about 60 or 70%, something like that. And passenger cars from road transport makes about 50 or 60%. So we need to tackle this issue, because basically the passenger cars are the things that are not currently regulated enough. But why am I talking about the transport sector as such? I forgot to mention that. If you think about greenhouse gases that are emitted within the European Union, then you would think, well, the biggest emitters, if you consider ETS, is maybe agriculture, maybe industry, maybe electricity generation and heat generation. Well, you will be correct within the electricity generation, because for a long time it has been the biggest polluter. However, if you take the whole transport sector, it's the second biggest polluter in the EU, and on current trajectory, it might be even the biggest one, if we do nothing within that. Mm-hmm. So we need to tackle the issue, we need to tackle it decisively. 44% of all greenhouse gases in 2030, if we stay at the current trajectory. 30%, that's even more than electricity and waste, electricity generation. How can we tackle that? Well, the obvious answer nowadays are basically battery electric cars, battery electric vehicles. This is the only solution. The market is steadily growing, but it's not growing fast enough. So this is the first issue we have. You might think, well, if we have enough electric vehicles, then you need to charge them. And how are you going to charge it? Well, with the electricity you make. But if you are making the electricity, wouldn't you also make the greenhouse gases from production of electricity? But not necessarily. I don't think you can see that, but so this is a very nice graph. Here you can see that if in 2030 there's a 30% share of electric vehicles within the EU, those are the additional emissions in power sector. However, these green color, those are avoided emissions in transport sector. So it still makes sense to have the electric vehicles penetrate the market more. In 2050, if the penetration reaches 80%, then you can see the difference is huge. So again, we need to tackle the issue. We need to invest more into electric vehicles. Yeah, I think I covered that. If we are talking about our current legislation, well, the framework is very robust. I think I will not go into detail, but I did divide it into two main groups. The first one, direct effect, or something I call directly affected legislation. It's about regulation on type approval. So basically, if you want to have a car in the European Union, you need to have a type approved to be able to reach the internal market. Then you have Euro 7, Euro 5, Euro 6 regulations that are covering polluting substances such as soot particles, such as nitrogen oxides, something like that. Then you have regulation on CO2 from new vehicles, you know, those infamous goal of banning our combustion engines, stuff like that. So this is also directly affects the car manufacturers. Then you have Clean Vehicles Directive, that's about public procurement, and then we have indirect effect. There you can see ETS, and especially ETS2. If you think about the ETS, it's more about aviation sector. ETS2 is more about fuels and non-renewable fuels. Then you have Renewable Energy Directive, which basically states a target for each member state to achieve a gross consumption of renewable energy in transport sector. Then you have the AFIR directive, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation. Sorry, it's a regulation, but it used to be a directive. Then you have competition rules, because you need to be aware of them when you are entering the market. And of course, air quality directive. Because you would think, if you are talking about Euro 5, Euro 6, Euro 7, and those polluting substances, air quality will be affected by that. However, then you can think, are there any effects within those two pieces of legislation? Well, they are not really. So this is also hugely problematic. And you have a lot of case law within the European Court of Justice. So this was just overview. There are many more legislative pieces, but just to give you a little bit of a legal overview what we are talking when we are talking about the transport sector. And finally, Czech perspective. Average age of cars in Czech Republic, well, in 2024, I would guess it's 16 years old. And this is the biggest number of all member states here present. The EU average 12.3 or 12.5, I think nowadays. But in Czechia, well, basically we are beginning to be more of a old car nation, let's say. Then you can think about 16 years. Nowadays you have iPhone 16. So basically Czech Republic still uses the first iPhone, if you are talking about the technological perspective. Then there's this huge issue, because the transport sector, and especially passenger car sector, is basically unified. There's not much for the harmonization, it's unification within the EU. Which makes sense, because if you want to sell cars, then you have common rules for everybody, for every member state, even some non-EU states, so unified rules just make sense here. On the other hand, what is the discretion of member states? What can the member states do? Well, all of those things, if you are talking about sustainable transport, positive economical instruments, well, financial incentives to buy electric vehicles, or maybe low emission zones, or establishing low emission zones. Well, there's this possibility under the Czech law, but none has been established in Czech Republic. And tax and road tolls abatement. Something similar, I think, is in basically all member states, if you think about it long and hard enough. But this is what we have in Czech Republic. Vehicles and the numbers of vehicles we have, because you need to have the perspective. So total number of vehicles in Czech Republic is 6.4 million. The population of Czech Republic is 10 million. Remember this number. Almost 28,000 battery electric vehicles in 2022. And I will ask you a little bit later. Then if you think about infrastructure, and especially the battery electric infrastructure and charging points, we have 2.6k charging points. Bear in mind that charging point is not the same as charging station, because charging station can have multiple charging points. And we have policy, this National Action Plan for Clean Mobility, which is basically the result of the directive and nowadays AFIR regulation. Let's talk about the National Action Plan for Clean Mobility. Again, all of our member states have it, because this is prerogative of the directive and the regulation. So the first one was drafted in 2015, then amended 2020. Currently, there's going to be a new one. Ministry of Trade is the main ministry, and of course it creates it with cooperation with other ministries. However, the new draft is still heavily dependent on compressed natural gas. And if you think about natural gas, it's not really a renewable energy source. However, Czech government has entered into some kind of memorandum with gas sector, so they are still trying to push the natural gas to be renewable, but it's just not. I'm not talking about hydrogen, because hydrogen cars just doesn't make sense because of their price, especially the passenger cars. If you are talking about heavy-duty trucks, yeah, that makes sense, but not passenger cars. The new goal in our new action plan is to educate people on e-mobility. Because the ministry recognized that among people there is a lot of misinformation about battery electric vehicles, which is true. And if I call it bro science, because usually that is this information is relayed within some kind of communities and the petrol heads, but they are not based on the actual science, because if you look at the science, if you look at the data, but the results are completely different. And also there's a huge approach or shift to the e-car sharing, and also vulnerable groups, which is just this really broad targets that has to do something with vulnerable groups. I don't know what. It doesn't really state there in the action plan. So I guess they are going to give money to vulnerable groups to buy electric vehicles. I don't know. Who knows? Or they're going to educate them. I don't know. So this is this huge gap there. And if you remember the number, Matusz?
27.6.
Yes. So the action plan predicts to have 50,000 battery electric vehicles by the end of the next year. I don't know how I'm going to do that.
Magic.
And in 2030, 250,000. So though I don't think they will actually fulfill these goals.
Really?
And but we will see. Maybe they will hand out the battery electric vehicles. I don't know. And of course,
that could work.
the thing is, it's still predominantly focused on infrastructure, because it makes sense. You need to have a robust infrastructure for the alternative fuels. And I see the objective for member states of the gross consumption of renewable energy in transport sector is 29% by 2030. Czech Republic has 7.5. So again, I don't know how we are going to do that. So we are arrived at conclusion, and my conclusion is the concept of sustainable transport is very broad. Then maybe you can think, well, do we actually need a definition of sustainable transport? We do, because when we are talking about investments, we need to know which modes of transport are the sustainable ones, so we can invest in those. And I think I can bet that Czechia will not achieve the member state target of 29% in 2030 of the gross consumption of renewable energy sources. And the thing is, and this is just my opinion, I think we still underestimate spatial planning and discretionary powers of municipalities. Because when we are talking about sustainable transport, it should be not about battery electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. It should be about tackling vehicles as such. Because we need to think about spatial planning of putting people first and public transportation first and cars second or third, or if it's possible, even not them. And this is basically mindset we have, I think, from communist era, and we need to tackle it and we need to change it. So this is thing this is still, we should do something about it when we are doing the spatial planning. And of course, especially in Czech Republic, but I also think in Slovakia, in Hungary, maybe in Romania, because automotive industry plays a very huge role in those economies. The unwillingness of people, politicians, to just let go of combustion engines. Because when you say automotive industry, almost all the people think combustion engines. And again, this is the wrong approach. And that's all. Thank you very much.